The quantum communication relay trembled with an energy that defied conventional physics. Zorak, a senior communications officer of the Volt Collective, felt her exoskeletal tendrils freeze mid-motion as the first transmission burst through the galactic network. Her sensory appendages, typically precise and measured, now quivered with an emotion she had never experienced before: absolute terror. The message was simple. Brutally, impossibly simple. Human ships approaching. 5 words that should have meant nothing. 5 words that now caused entire star systems to collectively hold their breath. Zorak's communication hub, a marvel of technological sophistication that had processed billions of interstellar messages over centuries, began to malfunction. Circuits designed to remain calm under the most extreme circumstances started to overheat. Quantum data streams fragmented, then reassembled in patterns that made no logical sense. She replayed the transmission. Again and again. Each replay revealed something different. The message wasn't just text. It was a carrier wave of pure psychological disruption. Something in its quantum signature caused immediate, visceral reactions across multiple species and communication platforms. In the research stations of the Andromeda cluster, lead scientists dropped precision instruments. Military commanders canceled centuries-old exploration missions. Diplomatic corps began emergency evacuation protocols without consulting their governmental hierarchies. No one could explain why. 3 light-years away, on the communication hub of the Crystalline Confederacy, Administrator Xelnaga watched in horror as entire communication networks began to collapse. The transmission wasn't just spreading, it was replicating. Each repetition carried a subtle variation that seemed to bypass standard communication filters. "Scan the source," Xelnaga commanded, her crystalline body vibrating with tension. The result came back instantly. Unknown. Untrackable. Impossible. The transmission carried something beyond simple information. It carried a psychological payload that triggered deep-seated survival responses. Species that had never encountered humans, species separated by thousands of light years, all responded with the same fundamental reaction. Pure, unfiltered terror. In the academic archives of the Quantum Research Collective, Professor Lyra Vex pulled up historical records. Humans had been categorized as a developing species for centuries. Minor. Inconsequential. Their technological progress had been consistently underestimated. Yet something about this transmission suggested something far more profound was happening. The message wasn't just information. It was a weapon. A psychological disruption wave that caused entire civilizations to recalibrate their understanding of existence. Back in the Volt Collective's primary communication hub, Zorak realized something was fundamentally wrong with how the transmission was behaving. It shouldn't be possible for a simple text message to cause such widespread disruption. Communication protocols were designed with multiple failsafes. Quantum encryption should prevent any unauthorized psychological manipulation. But this was different. The transmission carried a signature that defied current understanding of information transfer. It wasn't just text. It wasn't just a signal. It was something else entirely. Across the galaxy, emergency meetings were called. Military vessels began mysterious repositioning operations. Diplomatic channels that had remained stable for millennia suddenly became unpredictable. And at the center of it all was a simple message: human ships approaching. 5 words that were rapidly becoming the most dangerous communication in galactic history. Zorak's tendrils continued to tremble. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. And no one, not a single species in the known galaxy, was prepared. The transmission continued to spread. Silent, relentless, transformative, waiting. The Sol System archives remained a forgotten repository of humanity's most obscure historical records. James Rodriguez knew this better than anyone. As a junior analyst in the Sol System Expeditionary Force, he had been assigned to the most mundane position imaginable, cataloging ancient digital archives that most believed contained nothing of value. His workspace was a small, climate-controlled chamber deep within the Lunar Research Complex. Rows of quantum storage units lined the walls, each containing petabytes of compressed historical data. Most researchers considered this collection a bureaucratic necessity, a digital museum of humanity's unremarkable past. James was different. Where others saw endless rows of meaningless data, he saw patterns, connections, subtle threads of information that seemed to whisper hidden stories. On this particular evening, his standard data verification routine took an unexpected turn. The compressed file deep in the archives caught his attention, not because of its content, but because of its strange compression algorithm. It was old, older than most current researchers would consider relevant. The file was dated 47 years, 3 months, and 16 days ago. Most would have overlooked it. James downloaded the file. His primary scanning algorithm began to work, peeling back layers of encryption that seemed almost organic in their complexity. Each layer revealed something more intriguing than the last. This was no ordinary archive. This was something else entirely. The first breakthrough came at 2:37 in the morning. James nearly spilled his second cup of synthetic coffee when the initial decryption completed. Fragments of communication logs, partial mission reports, encrypted transmissions that seemed to dance between multiple communication protocols. What emerged was a story that had been deliberately hidden. Humanity's early exploration efforts had not been the clumsy, ineffective missions recorded in official history. These logs suggested something far more complex, encounters with alien civilizations that had been completely erased from standard historical records. One particular set of logs caught his attention, a mission designated as Horizon Echo, a name so generic it practically screamed classified to someone like James. The mission report was fragmented, incomplete, but what remained was extraordinary. A small human exploration team had encountered an advanced research station belonging to a species known as the Crystalline Confederacy. The official record suggested a routine diplomatic failure, a minor incident quickly forgotten. But these logs told a different story. The human team, led by Captain Elena Martinez, had not failed. They had done something far more significant. The logs suggested they had completely dismantled the research station's operational protocols, not through force, but through an unprecedented display of cognitive adaptation. James read the fragments with increasing excitement. The human team had solved multiple interdimensional research problems that had stumped the Crystalline Confederacy for generations. They had rewritten communication protocols that were considered immutable. They had approached complexity with a flexibility that defied all known scientific models. And then, almost as quickly as the encounter happened, it had been completely erased from official records. Why? The compression algorithm was unlike anything James had seen. It wasn't just data encryption. It was a form of intentional historical manipulation. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide these encounters. As dawn broke over the lunar research complex, James realized he was looking at something far more significant than a simple archival discovery. This was evidence of a systematic effort to minimize humanity's true potential. The logs suggested that human explorers possessed something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They had an unquantifiable adaptability, a cognitive flexibility that could fundamentally challenge established scientific and cultural paradigms. James began to compile his findings, knowing full well that this discovery could change everything. The transmission from Part 1 suddenly made perfect sense. Something was coming, and humanity's true nature was about to be revealed. The Andromeda Research Complex stood as a monument to scientific achievement, a massive structure suspended in the quantum-stabilized space between star systems. It represented the pinnacle of galactic research capabilities. Massive crystalline chambers housed experiment modules that could manipulate reality itself. Thousands of researchers from hundreds of species worked tirelessly to unlock the universe's deepest mysteries. They never expected a small human exploration team to unravel everything in less than 72 hours. Captain Elena Martinez stood at the center of what would become known as the most significant first contact event in galactic history. Her team of 6 researchers looked nothing like the typical exploration units. They were a mismatched group, each seemingly chosen for their ability to think beyond conventional boundaries. Dr. Marcus Williams, the team's lead xenobiologist, adjusted his worn field equipment. His reputation preceded him, a researcher who had been repeatedly censured for unconventional methodologies by academic institutions back on Earth. What his colleagues called recklessness, Martinez recognized as pure innovative potential. The research station itself was a marvel of alien engineering. Constructed by the Crystalline Confederacy, it represented generations of scientific development. Multiple dimensional research chambers lined its interior, each designed to explore the most complex quantum interactions imaginable. The human team's arrival should have been routine, a standard diplomatic exchange, a brief moment of cross-cultural interaction. Instead, it became something else entirely. The first sign of trouble came during initial communication protocols. The station's primary AI system, a marvel of computational complexity, began to malfunction the moment the human team entered its primary research wing. Dr. Sarah Connor, the team's quantum computational specialist, approached the central research interface. Where other species saw an impenetrable system of advanced technology, she saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface with a speed and intuition that defied explanation. The station's researchers watched in growing horror and fascination. Within hours, the humans had done the impossible. They solved 3 generations-old research problems that had stumped the Crystalline Confederacy's most brilliant minds. Not through brute force computational power, but through a fundamentally different approach to problem solving. The research station's lead scientist, Professor Xelnera, could only watch in mounting terror as the human team rewrote fundamental research protocols. They didn't just solve problems, they reimagined entire fields of scientific understanding. A quantum entanglement experiment that had been stalled for decades suddenly found resolution. A multi-dimensional communication protocol was rewritten from scratch. Complex mathematical models that had seemed impossible were suddenly elegantly simple. But it was more than just scientific achievement. The humans demonstrated something far more dangerous, a cognitive flexibility that suggested their minds operated on a fundamentally different level of perception. They didn't just think outside the box. They seemed unaware that a box existed in the first place. By the end of the 3rd day, the research station was in complete disarray, not through destruction, but through a complete transformation of its fundamental operational paradigms. The Crystalline Confederacy's leadership would later classify the entire incident. Full communication blackouts were enacted. Every record of the human team's visit was systematically removed from official databases. But some things cannot be entirely erased. Fragments remained, whispers of an encounter that suggested humanity was something entirely different from what galactic civilizations had assumed. Captain Martinez and her team left the research station unchanged. They didn't celebrate. They didn't boast. They simply moved on to their next assignment, completely unaware of the fundamental shift they had just created. In the decades that followed, researchers would look back on this moment as the first true indication of what humanity might become. A species not defined by technological advancement, but by an unprecedented ability to see beyond established limitations. The seeds of the future had been planted, and no one was prepared for what would grow. The galactic evacuation began without warning. No single species could explain the precise moment when collective panic transformed into systematic withdrawal. It started as a whisper, a subtle reconfiguration of established communication networks, and rapidly evolved into the most comprehensive migration in recorded galactic history. Admiral Helena Reyes studied the holographic displays in her strategic command center. Thousands of fleet movements scrolled across multiple dimensional projections. Each colored trajectory represented an entire civilization's exodus, moving with a synchronicity that defied rational explanation. The Quantum Concordance, a loose federation of advanced species that had maintained galactic stability for millennia, was dissolving before her eyes. "This makes no sense," her second-in-command, Commander David Chen, muttered. And yet, it was happening. Star systems that had remained stable for thousands of years began to empty. Research stations went dark. Diplomatic channels collapsed into static and uncertainty. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were running, and no one could articulate exactly why. Reports flooded in from every sector. The Crystalline Confederacy had abandoned 3 entire research clusters. The Quantum Harmonics Network had initiated a complete system shutdown. Long-range communication relays were being systematically dismantled or abandoned. Most disturbing was the pattern of evacuation. It wasn't chaotic. It was too precise, too coordinated, almost as if something was guiding the entire process. In the central archives of the Galactic Historical Preservation Society, lead researcher Dr. Emily Rodriguez discovered something extraordinary. Hidden between layers of encrypted data were fragmentary records that suggested this wasn't the first time such a large-scale evacuation had been considered. Historical logs hinted at previous encounters, moments when galactic civilizations had collectively decided to withdraw from certain regions of space. But those were legends, myths passed down through generations. This was different. The evacuation wasn't just a retreat. It was a systematic dismantling of established galactic infrastructure. Communication relays that had existed for centuries were being carefully decommissioned. Research data was being meticulously archived and then removed. Military assets were being repositioned with a precision that suggested something more than simple fear. Admiral Reyes watched as entire fleet formations began to move, not in panic, not in disorder, but with a calculated methodology that suggested careful planning. "What are they running from?" Commander Chen asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Deep within the communication networks, fragments of the original transmission continued to pulse. Human ships approaching. 5 words that had triggered a response beyond anyone's comprehension. In the research stations of the Quantum Harmonics Network, lead scientists began to piece together a terrifying possibility. This wasn't just an evacuation. This was a controlled withdrawal, a strategic repositioning of galactic civilizations in response to something fundamental. The human encounter at the Andromeda Research Complex was no longer an isolated incident. It was becoming clear that something far more significant was happening. Entire star systems went dark, not through destruction, not through conflict, but through a systematic, almost surgical withdrawal that defied all known strategic thinking. Admiral Reyes realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a galactic-scale response to a threat that couldn't be quantified, a collective action driven by something beyond rational understanding. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were running, and they were doing so with a precision that suggested they knew exactly what was coming. Something was approaching, and nothing would ever be the same again. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like a collection of mismatched dreams. No 2 ships looked alike, where alien vessel designs spoke of mathematical precision and streamlined engineering. These human ships looked like something assembled from pure imagination and desperate necessity. Admiral Michael Thompson stood on the bridge of the command vessel, a ship that defied every known naval architectural principle. Its hull bore marks of countless modifications, each telling a story of improvisation and survival. Scorch marks from unknown encounters. Retrofitted communication arrays that looked like they'd been cobbled together from spare parts. Sensor packages that seemed to be more art than science. "Tactical display," Thompson commanded. A holographic projection flickered to life. Hundreds of alien communication relays hung in the void of space. Silent. Empty. Waiting. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, the ship's primary navigation officer, traced her fingers across the holographic interface. Her movements were quick, precise, each gesture revealing a depth of understanding that went beyond standard navigation protocols. "Sir," she called out, "something's wrong with the standard scanning algorithms." Thompson raised an eyebrow. In the human exploration fleet, "something's wrong" was often the prelude to a breakthrough. The fleet's approach was anything but conventional. Ships moved with a fluidity that made no sense to traditional navigation systems. They didn't follow predictable patterns. They didn't adhere to established movement protocols. Each vessel seemed to make decisions independently, yet somehow remained perfectly coordinated. Deep within the communication networks of abandoned alien research stations, sensors began to detect something unprecedented. The human ships weren't just moving. They were communicating in a way that defied all known communication models. Information seemed to flow between vessels not through standard transmission protocols, but through something more fundamental, almost organic in its complexity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the fleet's lead xenocommunication specialist, watched the data streams with growing excitement. Where other researchers saw interference, she saw a language, a method of communication so complex that it appeared completely random to traditional analysis. "They don't understand," she muttered, tracing complex quantum interaction patterns. The first contact zones began to light up. Abandoned research stations, evacuated communication relays, entire star systems that had gone dark in anticipation of the human approach. But the humans weren't approaching like conquerors. They weren't sending standard diplomatic communications. They were simply existing. Each ship carried a unique signature, a method of interaction that seemed to rewrite the very fundamental rules of space exploration. Lieutenant Martinez continued to work her console. Her fingers moved with a speed that suggested she was doing far more than simple navigation. She was solving problems, rewriting communication protocols, discovering solutions to challenges that had been considered impossible. Admiral Thompson watched the tactical display. Years of military experience told him something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't a standard exploratory mission. This was something else entirely. The abandoned alien infrastructure began to react in unexpected ways. Communication relays that had been shut down for weeks suddenly flickered to partial life. Sensor arrays that had been deliberately disabled began to pulse with uncertain energy. It was as if the very presence of the human fleet was causing fundamental changes to the surrounding space. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis began to take shape. The human ships weren't just moving through space. They were interacting with it, changing it, redefining the very fundamental rules of spatial interaction. "We're not just exploring," she whispered to herself. "We're transforming." The fleet continued its approach. No weapons charged, no standard communication signals transmitted, just a profound fundamental presence that seemed to challenge the very nature of established galactic understanding. Something was coming, and nothing would remain the same. Psychological warfare had never looked like this. The Xenop Psychological Research Institute had spent centuries developing models of interspecies conflict. Thousands of brilliant minds had mapped out complex strategies of communication, confrontation, and cultural interaction. Entire academic careers had been built on understanding how different civilizations might interact. None of them had anticipated the human approach. Dr. Laura Bennett leaned over her quantum analysis console, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and unprecedented scientific excitement. The data streams pouring in defied every known computational model. The human fleet wasn't just moving through space. They were fundamentally altering the psychological landscape of entire civilizations. "This is impossible," her research assistant mumbled. But it was happening. The human presence triggered something far beyond traditional psychological responses. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about aggression. It was something more profound. A complete recalibration of existential understanding. Alien civilizations weren't just retreating. They were experiencing a fundamental crisis of perception. Each human ship seemed to carry a psychological payload that went beyond traditional communication. Standard defensive protocols simply dissolved. Military systems designed to withstand the most complex psychological warfare became meaningless. The humans didn't attack. They didn't threaten. They simply existed in a way that completely dismantled established understanding. In the central research chambers of the Quantum Harmonics Network, lead researchers watched in growing horror. Their most advanced predictive models collapsed within seconds of the human fleet's approach. Computational systems designed to anticipate millions of potential interaction scenarios became completely non-functional. Dr. Bennett's analysis revealed something extraordinary. The human ships were broadcasting something that wasn't a signal, wasn't a message. It was a fundamental way of perceiving reality. Where alien civilizations saw boundaries, the humans saw possibilities. Where established research models saw limitations, the humans saw opportunities. Where sophisticated communication networks saw complex protocols, the humans saw simple solutions. Each ship became a point of cognitive disruption. Military strategists across multiple star systems began to understand the true nature of the threat. This wasn't about technology. This wasn't about military might. This was about a fundamental way of existing that challenged every established understanding of reality. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Entire communication networks began to reconfigure themselves, not through external manipulation, but through a fundamental shift in perception triggered by the human approach. Defensive systems designed to protect against invasion became meaningless. They simply dissolved. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, a junior communication specialist on one of the human vessels, watched the external sensors with a casual curiosity that would have terrified alien observers. Where others saw complex technological systems, he saw puzzles waiting to be solved. His fingers moved across communication interfaces with an intuition that defied traditional understanding. Complex quantum encryption became simple mental exercises. Interdimensional communication protocols transformed into elegant, simple solutions. The human fleet didn't need weapons. Their very existence was the most powerful form of psychological disruption imaginable. Dr. Bennett's research revealed the true depth of the phenomenon. The humans weren't just exploring. They were fundamentally challenging the very concept of exploration itself. Each interaction became a moment of profound cognitive transformation. Alien civilizations found themselves facing something beyond invasion, beyond first contact. They were experiencing a complete reimagining of their fundamental understanding of existence. The fleet continued its approach. Silent, relentless, transformative. Something was changing. And nothing would ever be the same again. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the intersection of multiple scientific disciplines, her reputation built on challenging fundamental assumptions. The Galactic Research Consortium had long considered her a radical, someone who approached scientific understanding with a flexibility that made traditional researchers deeply uncomfortable. Her laboratory occupied a unique space between quantum physics, synapsology, and cognitive mathematics. Walls covered with complex diagrams that seemed to shift and change depending on how one looked at them. Holographic displays tracked data streams that defied conventional understanding. The human encounter was more than a simple first contact scenario. It was a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. Dr. Vasquez's primary research focused on something she called cognitive plasticity, the ability of intelligent systems to fundamentally reshape their understanding of reality. Where other researchers saw fixed paradigms, she saw fluid possibilities. Her team had been tracking the human fleet's approach for weeks, not through traditional observation methods, but through a complex network of quantum entanglement sensors that captured something far more profound than physical movement. It's not about what they do, she told her research team. It's about how they perceive. The key revelation came during a late-night analysis session. Dr. Marcus Williams, her lead computational specialist, noticed something extraordinary in the data streams. The human ships weren't just moving through space. They were interacting with it in a way that suggested a complete reimagining of spatial-temporal relationships. Traditional alien civilizations understood exploration as a process of external discovery. Humans approached it as a continuous process of internal transformation. Where a crystalline Confederacy research vessel would meticulously map a star system, a human ship would fundamentally reimagine its very existence. Communication wasn't about transmission of information. It was about creating entirely new frameworks of understanding. Dr. Vasquez's breakthrough came from an unlikely combination of quantum entanglement theory and cognitive linguistics. The human approach wasn't just a method of exploration. It was a complete cognitive ecosystem. Each human ship carried something beyond technological capabilities. They carried a fundamental way of perceiving reality that challenged every established scientific model. The research team worked through multiple iterations. Complex holographic models showed how human cognitive approaches fundamentally altered the very fabric of communication and perception. Languages weren't just translated. They were reimagined. Scientific protocols weren't just studied. They were continuously reinvented. Technological challenges weren't obstacles. They were opportunities for fundamental transformation. Admiral Helena Reyes, watching from the Strategic Command Center, began to understand the true nature of what was happening. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't a diplomatic mission. This was a fundamental reimagining of galactic existence. Dr. Vasquez's final report was both terrifying and extraordinary. The human fleet didn't just explore. They transformed. Every interaction became a moment of profound cognitive evolution. Alien civilizations had approached space exploration as a process of external discovery. Humans approached it as a continuous process of internal and external transformation. The quantum sensors revealed something unprecedented. The human ships were broadcasting something that wasn't a signal, wasn't a message. It was a way of existing that fundamentally challenged established understanding of reality. Where alien civilizations saw boundaries, humans saw possibilities. Where established research models saw limitations, humans saw opportunities. Where sophisticated communication networks saw complex protocols, humans saw elegant solutions. The breakthrough wasn't technological. It was cognitive. Humanity wasn't just exploring the galaxy. They were fundamentally reimagining the very concept of exploration itself. As Dr. Vasquez completed her analysis, she realized something profound. The human fleet's approach wasn't just changing the galaxy. It was evolving it. Something extraordinary was happening, and nothing would remain the same. The final transformation began not with a battle, but with a moment of profound silence. Admiral Michael Thompson stood on the bridge of his command vessel, watching as the evacuated star systems spread before them. Entire galactic infrastructures had dissolved, not through destruction, but through a systematic withdrawal that defied all conventional understanding. Communication arrays that had existed for millennia now hung empty. Research stations that had been the pinnacle of scientific achievement stood abandoned. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had chosen complete retreat over confrontation. "We're not here to conquer," Thompson said quietly to his bridge crew. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez nodded, her fingers dancing across complex holographic interfaces. Each movement suggested something beyond standard navigation. She was solving problems that hadn't even been identified yet. The Galactic Concordance, that loose federation of advanced species that had maintained interstellar stability for generations, had completely collapsed. Not through conflict, not through war, but through a fundamental recalibration of existence itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the fleet's lead xenocommunication specialist, began to compile the final mission report. Her analysis revealed something far more profound than a simple exploratory mission. Humanity wasn't conquering the galaxy. They were transforming it. Every abandoned communication relay told a story. Every empty research station spoke of a civilization that had encountered something beyond its comprehension. The human approach wasn't about territorial expansion. It was about fundamental cognitive evolution. Where alien civilizations saw boundaries, humans saw possibilities. Where established research models saw limitations, humans saw opportunities. Where sophisticated communication networks saw complex protocols, humans saw elegant solutions. The fleet's approach had triggered a complete reimagining of interstellar existence. Diplomatic channels that had been carefully maintained for centuries simply dissolved. Military systems designed to withstand the most complex invasions became meaningless. Entire species had chosen complete withdrawal over a single moment of interaction. Admiral Thompson understood the true nature of their mission. This wasn't exploration in the traditional sense. This was a fundamental reimagining of what exploration could mean. Dr. Rodriguez's final analysis was both terrifying and extraordinary. The human fleet had done something unprecedented. They had transformed the very concept of first contact. No weapons had been fired. No traditional diplomatic protocols had been followed. No standard communication had been attempted. They had simply existed, and in that existence, they had fundamentally altered the galactic understanding of possibility. The abandoned research stations began to tell their story. Fragments of data revealed how each encounter with human vessels had triggered a complete cognitive restructuring. Alien systems designed to be impenetrable became fluid. Communication protocols became simple conversations. Lieutenant Martinez continued to work her console, solving complex interdimensional communication challenges as if they were simple puzzles. Her approach suggested something beyond traditional understanding, a way of perceiving that transformed challenges into opportunities. The galactic concordance had fallen, not through destruction, but through a profound realization. Humanity represented something far more dangerous than a military threat. They were a cognitive force that challenged the very foundations of established civilization. As the human fleet continued its approach, something extraordinary happened. The abandoned star systems began to change. Communication relays that had been shut down for weeks began to reconfigure. Sensor arrays that had been deliberately disabled started to pulse with new energy. It was as if the human presence alone was capable of fundamental transformation. Admiral Thompson watched the holographic displays with a calm certainty. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't a conquest. This was evolution. The final transmission went out across all remaining communication networks. Not a message of threat, not a declaration of war, simply a statement of existence. Human ships approaching. 5 words that had changed everything. And nothing would ever be the same again.